Very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to talk about something very interesting. While I'm sure you must be fully charged with what our entrepreneurs are offering in terms of solutions, the innovation, the pitch presentations, what our fellow entrepreneurs would have made just now. But this session is slightly different. This session, I'm going to talk about from our experience of how to build a startup-led economy, how to build startup nations. And this is a sheer experience of practically doing very similar work in different parts of the world. And also from the country I am coming from, which is India, which is known for a program called Startup India. I'm going to talk about the sheer experience that if any country or any region or even any province wants to build a structured startup ecosystem, then what does it take? And my whole presentation actually is just one slide. While I have kept two more just to keep the audience warm in the beginning, but this is the only slide, which is the framework. My colleague Rohit can circulate if someone is interested in. This is a cheat sheet for any economy to create a startup ecosystem. So with this, let me start. What is startup? In a very simple language, it is an enterprise which is doing some innovation. People qualify different enterprises in different forms. Someone call it as SMEs, someone call it as a startup, and some matured enterprises are called as large enterprises. The ones you go global, they are called as multinational enterprises. Eventually, it starts with that entity registration, which is bringing some sort of innovation in whatever we traditionally do. And it is the flavor of the day. Why this is important for any economy? Why this is important for any government, any region, any policy maker, or any even political leaders? Because it creates economic prosperity. And the numbers which you are seeing right now, it can increase or amplify the job creation amplification at the rate of 25%. My understanding says one startup, if it can sustain for 1 year of its journey, because the first year is the most difficult, can straightforward add fresh 10 jobs as one enterprise. And the moment it grows, you have another high level paying jobs coming from that economy. What more can we get? Wealth. This is a phenomenal multiplier of creating wealth. I'm not getting into the valuations per se, but this is real wealth. This is creating an economic activity. I'll give you my example. 5 years back, I used to pay credit card. I used to cut a check, go all the way to the bank ATM to drop my check. And because of the transformation in the financial sector, the applications which are accessible, I pay my credit card bill in less than 30 seconds because I just click it, my payment get transferred from my bank account to the thing. Now the time saving which I am doing is a huge benefit to an economy, not only in terms of the wealth what a startup is creating, but the overall productivity of any person who is saving his or her bandwidth and making it more productive is another value of wealth creation. New opportunities. I don't think so anybody can say possibly that they don't know Uber, they don't know Airbnb, and the way they have transformed, it's very easy for me to click button and get a cab from here, I can go anywhere, just because of the opportunities which these are creating. And imagine the kind of number of jobs which these companies like Ubers of the world who have created for, in this case, the driver partners. And last but not the least is the quality of life. I firmly believe this is an area, this is a segment of the industry which pays higher than a traditional set. So these are the 4 elements if any government needs to get convinced why we should do that. A glimpse of the region from where I have come, which is India, and this is a very simple, straightforward statistics of what this program, we call it as Startup Nation, has created in India in just 6 years. It is just a 6-year statistics. I'm not talking about 15 years. And that was the time when this program was launched. As KPMG, we had the privilege of working with the government. So if you see, since 2016, when we had 750 startups, registered startups, today that number has gone up to 65,000 registered startups. And these are all recognized startups, which means they have qualified the filter or the parameter which government consider any enterprise to be called as startup. In 2015, we had technically 490 investors, registered startup, which has gone to 4,700. And I can tell you by end of this year, this will cross 10,000. We had close to 8 unicorns, and happy to share, this month we crossed 94. And we all understand the valuation behind a unicorn. And I'm talking about the likes of Oyo, which I am sure quite a few of you have heard about, the Paytms of the world. Funding, which was, we were just looking at merely 8 billion in 2015, has crossed 40 billion today. It's a 5x jump. Now, what has also helped the base infrastructure, incubators, which we believe is an essential component for any ecosystem to flourish, that has again got amplified. Now, what has also helped India in amplifying this was the entire movement of building ecosystem at state level or the provincial level. It is not only the government of India's program or any federal government. You need to really charge up the city ecosystem, the municipal ecosystem, the entire administration, while you need to have one anchor ministry is what this whole program is all about. And this is the screen which I'm going to talk about, the framework. If it is not clear, please request my colleague Rohit, who can give this framework. I'm going to talk about this particular framework, and it talks about 4 clear areas which any economy needs to look after when it comes to creating a startup ecosystem. So let me start by talking about the very first element. If you see on the top left, which is called as ecosystem amplification, that's how the whole story starts. Now, it's not that any country can't have startup or don't have startups. It exists by virtue of the entrepreneurial nature of those individuals who wants to do something different, so they register themselves as startup. Now, but what we need a definition for calling any enterprise as startup. It cannot be any normal definition of an enterprise, because if you are doing this, we are confusing ourselves between the SME and a startup. So definition is something very critical, and I can say from Indian experience, we have revised the definition twice. And this revision is a continuous process. So once you have a definition, you have the base framework that what are the 5 or 10 things which this country needs to do. That clarity gives us a confidence to an entrepreneur, investor, or even a base infrastructure provider that, yeah, this is a place wherein I can work in this space of startups. Because the government does not have a clear framework and a policy, believe me, you will not be able to fuel up your ecosystem the way you actually want it. So the first thing we need is the policy and the plan, and we have used the word called action plan. We have created 16 points agenda. I'll talk about that. Then another interesting point is that startups need a different regulatory framework. For example, we have now got used to of getting the medicines delivered at home, traditionally which we used to get while we go to the medicine shop and buy it from the counter. This demands a different regulatory regime. You cannot sell medicines online without any regulatory regime. So while you do it in the sandbox, but all these startups, for example, telemedicine which we all have experienced in last 2 years when we were at home, that was the only survival for us. So telemedicine startups, all these young ideas, new ideas need a regulatory backing. Otherwise, the growth is not that easy for the ecosystem. You might have one startup, but you won't be able to have one unicorn or 10 startups. So regulatory regime is very, very critical. Third point is that while countries certainly need to have a federal program, the national program, it's equally important for us to encourage this at the nth level, whether we call it as a rural end or the city-led or the municipal-led, because you don't know from which city you have an entrepreneur sitting and coming up and setting up their own firm. What we've also done in India is that because we have, it's a large complex country, we have so many provinces or states, we call it as, we created something called a startup ranking framework, in which we made different states compete with each other for the better ecosystem. And we made them rank one versus other. Now, as a result of this fierce competition between states, eventually state landed up doing something better, more for these startups, and trust me, it has really helped us. It starts with a very basic policy framework, creating fund, creating a team which can handhold that entrepreneur, creating an incubation center, creating that environment. So a lot of things which goes. So you need to really fire both the federal structure and the regional structure. And last but not the least, we have also created something called as recognition of startups. Now, for me, if I talk about 65,000 startups, how do I pick and choose and favor, or not favor, I would say, but how do I give little bit much edge to, let's say, 10 startups? So we created this program of awards and recognition, wherein through a proper structured process, we qualified certain startups with an independent panel, and we said we are going to go groom these 30 startups and help them to become unicorns. So the very first thing when any country needs in order to build a structured program of startup is the ecosystem. Then I might draw your attention towards the top second box on the right side, which is called building base infrastructure. Now, while an individual entrepreneur can be fully charged up to create a startup, but at the end of the day, if you don't have the base infrastructure to support, it's not going to help. Even for a service-led startup or for a infrastructure-led startup, we need some very basic support. For example, we need incubators. We need accelerators. And this does not happen easily. For example, in India, I can talk about, we have something called as Atal Incubation Centers. These are entrepreneurship-led initiative which any school, I'm saying school, kids can go in that room and experiment and think new. So look at the movement which is getting moved from young entrepreneur graduate to a student, right? So we need to create those base infrastructure, base programs, because that is how things will start moving further. Next, we need an online access platform, because it's not easy for any young entrepreneur or anyone leaving his or her full-time job to set up a company. Setting up a company needs a lot of process traversals, a lot of approvals, a lot of understanding of laws and regulatory regime. Even if a startup is, let's say, in a healthcare sector or a tech-driven, so you need to understand setting up a company, the tech part of it, and the healthcare part of it. So if you have an online interface which makes this life easy for setting up and running a startup, it makes things much easier, because after that, that startup can use that platform to connect with industry, to fetch funding, to get market access, to create more business, sales, and many more things. So the base digital interface is again very critical for any economy. Then comes the story of learning and development. How are you grooming them? How are you coaching them? That can even be as simple as making your pitch presentation. Trust me, I have seen those multiple presentations. They have a beautiful idea. The concept is mind-boggling, but they don't know how to make the presentation. They don't know how to make a pitch in front of the investors. And 90% of them just fall because they don't know how to present. So grooming them on those elements, either through a mentorship program or through a proper L&D program, is again a base infrastructure. And trust me, if governments are not doing this, nobody is going to help those entrepreneurs to come and do that. Except few VCs, few investors does, but that will not help to scale up by, let's say, 10x or 100x. These days, even countries are talking about trade fairs, wherein startups are being hand-holded. This is exactly a model of a trade fair, I may use the word, because here they are getting exposed to the wider audience, like their clients, their investors. These trade fairs help startups to get exposed to the market and get more business, either as a funding or as a sales. Corporate Connect. Corporate Connect is now, today I can say in India, it's a huge business, because what has happened over the last 5 years, when these startups were started, they are matured, Series A, Series B funded. A lot of corporates are coming and investing in these startups, either by creating the incubation centers, or by taking the funding, equity funding, or even by encouraging their own employees to go and leave the job and create some innovation-led ecosystem. So Corporate Connect, and last but not the least, these are the corporates eventually who can help your startup to get the first sales done. It's all about the sales, the MVPs, and all that. So Corporate Connect is another thing. And last but not the least is the policy regime, the regulatory regime, and especially the IPR. If you're not talking about the intellectual property rights, then you have a problem, because anybody can pick up those. So IPR regime, trademark regime, these all have to be parallelly strengthened by the government so that startups, whatever they are coming up with as innovation, is secured. Let me move to the third dimension, which is again very essential, access to funding. We have seen the pitch presentation happening just now, a lot of investors who have come and evaluated those things. But let me just help us understand what a government needs to do when it comes to creating an innovation-led funding kind of an environment. What government can do? Government can create fund of funds, which means a set of HNIs or the quasi-government organizations can come and set up a fund, and these funds can be routed through the accelerators, so that accelerators can help startups to get funding. That could be pre-series A, seed fund. It depends upon the stage in which government wants to invest. Seed fund for startup. This is an interesting area, and in my experience of studying this, I have been studying seed fund method for last almost 2 months now, and to my surprise, seed funding is such a big area for countries to understand, and I have learned that seed funding can vary from a $10,000 check. When I say seed funding, it is a pre-MVP stage, which means you only have an idea in your mind, in your presentation at max. It's not the product what you see. That delta of seed fund can vary from $10,000 or $100,000 to $5 million also. So imagine if your ecosystem is vibrant and you have a good idea, as a startup, you can raise a fund of 5 million as a seed round, which means you don't have a product. Still, you can raise 5 million. This is the call as the vibrancy of an ecosystem. All what investor need is a confidence that this startup will succeed because government has a framework to support. Ecosystem is pumping in money. There is a genuine startup. There is a genuine concept behind that startup, and it's not an ecosystem wherein someone will shut down that startup tomorrow. So that's the ecosystem confidence which government can create. Hence this story of seed funding. And if you're talking about a $1 million of a seed fund, imagine how pre-series A, Series B will look like. And this also corresponds to the size of the share you are giving. And I have seen that share also gradually reduces. For example, if a $100,000 kind of a pre-series round comes at, let's say, 20% of equity dilution, as you mature, this equity dilution goes down from 20% to 5%, and 100,000 goes from 100,000 to even 1 million. So the ticket size increases, the share decreases. This is just a matter of mind game, which is the confidence of the ecosystem. Funding ecosystem. Now, in this, what is important for us to leverage everyone, and I'm qualifying everyone in this case, corporates. They pump in the money. Venture capitalists, angel investors, seed fund agencies, high net worth individuals. So these all are the ecosystem players. What happens? Government says, I am creating a startup program, startup fund, but they say only it's a government program. But there are tons of people who are willing to spend money in creating startups. Leverage them, let them come and fund, let them come and fuel the ecosystem. There's a lot of money people want. This is, of course, a risky asset class, but now the mindset is changing because startup is not a new subject for anybody. Everyone knows this. So a lot of high net worth individuals are venturing ahead and putting in money in this asset class. You need a funding platform because eventually, let's say if I talk about 65,000 startups, how do you get an access to them? Who is credible, who is not? So this is again an additional of your digital platform, that if a funding platform is created by any country, which makes life of an investor easy to qualify A versus B startup, and the money will start flowing in. Otherwise, it's not easy for an entrepreneur to touch a high profile investor. They don't give time because they get at least 1,000 if not 10,000 applications per day. So these platforms brings another credibility. Investor outreach program is another job which I believe is government supposed to do, which means they bring these investors on board, make them assure some sort of a commitment that they will evaluate, let's say, X amount of startups and at least fund Y percentage of X. So this is another momentum which government can create by bringing and giving confidence to investors so that they eventually get that investment. Now I am coming to the last pillar, which is essential for any ecosystem to come, is talking about access to market. If eventually a startup is not making money, nobody is going to further invest that, right? No matter how good idea is. Now, this is again the job of the government to help startup to get the first check. Either you do it through the public service delivery by giving sort of a business in the government, or by reducing the criteria of the procurement of services, allowing startups to come. Because if a startup is delivering services to a government, the credibility goes up. Hence, you are eventually helping that startup to get money from the market. Startup Showcase is another opportunity or a platform wherein government can showcase these startups after qualifying certain parameters that this is something we believe has a potential as a startup, and any investor can come and encourage that startup. Hackathons, everyone knows this subject. This is the new norm. Everyone is trying to leverage that, so I'm not going to spend time on this. International partnerships and exposure is another very important area. Now, what happens when you have a slightly matured startup and they want to expand their product into global market, and this is what we can see. Startups from different countries coming and exhibiting in Dubai is an absolute example of an international exposure which some countries are giving to their startups and helping them to promote their products in a different economy, in a different region. So you're really helping them. So international programs, partnerships, and exposures are also essential. And this connects back to the point I made earlier about awards and recognition. So if you have your star startups, you can give them that first preference. Last but not the least, the point is grand challenges. Now, in this, what happens? When any government comes up with any program, let me give you an example, very basic example. I want to come up with a logo or a prototype or a national app. You can run this through a grand challenge. Ask your startup to come and create that application or design or anything, or even a prototype. Now, if you're giving an opportunity to that startup, and if that startup is creating good application for a government interface, imagine the motivation you are giving to your own country's entrepreneur who is hosting your flagship national application. So these are the 4 areas I believe are essential for any economy to create a structured or a templatized ecosystem. Repeating, we need ecosystem amplification. We need to work on creating the base infrastructure. We need to creating the funding framework and access to market. Now, what really will help, if I may look from the lens of the government, why government really needs to work on any startup ecosystem? If I may just draw your attention towards the bottom row, which talks about some flags, and what is the national overall impact which any country can envisage if you really run a program like this. You will encourage entrepreneurship-led ecosystem, jobs, direct impact will help in terms of the number of jobs which is going to increase. As I said, on an average, 7 to 10 jobs and startup can easily create in the first year of its thing. Fostering innovation, especially in tier 2, tier 3 cities. Typically, these startups sit out of the capital or the metro cities, but those tier 2, tier 3 cities can become more vibrant. Inclusive economic growth, inbound FDI investments through the investors. We can even look at export promotion, technology advancements, new market segments, and boosting local manufacturing and productivity. So this is what broadly the framework talks about. On the extreme right, I may just draw your attention to some of the toolkits which are available to any of us right now. You can go to the secondary sources, find out. I can help you find out those. We have some of our toolkits, which includes how do you create a digital hub, how do you create startup canvas, mentorship framework, startup awards, and so forth. What are the different funding channels one really need to look at when you're creating an ecosystem? You have provident funds, insurance companies, public sector enterprises, HNIs, family offices, and many more. What I have attempted here, I have tried to create a list of activities, and I'm more than happy to brainstorm and build this further because this will help all of us. So that options are not left out if anybody is thinking to create an ecosystem. Governance, I have only put it especially from the lens of the government, that what you really need, you need an expert group, because this is a completely new domain for many government, not only from their policy perspective, but in many cases from the technical perspective also. The sectors which startups are coming up these days are phenomenally new. For example, Web 3.0, very few private experts understand these subjects, and the startups are operating in Web 3.0. You need that SMEs or expert working group. You need a startup advisory council also. Now let me articulate what does this mean. For a government to function effectively, it's always good to work with the private sector and take advice of the private sector what they really need to do. Because if the enterprise or the entrepreneur or a large investor come and tell you what to do, it makes life of government much easy from the policy perspective. Ease of starting, this is very, very critical. And this is not the job wherein government should get in to intervene in the days working of startups, or rather than enabling them. So I believe that government should stay away from the startup business, but rather enable through the ease of doing business. Capacity development program, I have articulated some of the examples. It's not only important for government to help startup build capacities, but also government to build its own capacity to handle young and mature startups, because it itself is an art while you're helping without getting involved and bothering them. So capacity building happens at both the sides, at the private sector side, which is startup, and within the government. And moment you're talking about tier 2, tier 3 cities, provincial governments, you need more capacity building programs. And of course, last but not the least, any government needs some budgeting. I'm not saying, and the good part is that this is not a program which demands huge budgeting like any infrastructure. These are soft programs. The simple budgeting can easily help. I can talk at length on offline basis that what is the initial budget any government really need to earmark in order to start. What is the overall expense you can incur in the first year of your program, and how you can really create that. Stakeholders, it's important for us to map all the stakeholders and create a value proposition for all of them. Right now, I have only talked about two, which is startups and government. When I say government, we have to keep in mind while planning city administration, because eventually a startup is registered in a city. Sector ministries, different sectors who come and play. Provincial governments who eventually help us to multiply. Investors, enablers such as incubators and accelerators. And academia, which I just mentioned about one example, including school, colleges, and R&D institutions. So with this, I'm actually come to the end of the presentation, and I'm more than happy to take any questions and rather any suggestion if any of my fellow participants has in mind. So gentleman has a question that as KPMG, how am I associated, or we are associated with Startup India? So sir, we are the National PMO, Program Management Office for Government of India. We are formally contracted to help Indian government in building. And I take the privilege of saying that we have been involved right from day one, way back in 2016, when this program was announced by the government. So for us, is as good or old journey as for India, and we take pride in whatever we have created so far as a country.
Okay, my question is, how is KPMG as an MNC, apart from Startup India, do you have anything that helps startups or entrepreneurs as a company? Do you, involve yourself in the startup ecosystem apart from Startup India?
Absolutely. So I represent a part of the KPMG which works mostly with the government and the quasi-governments, but there's another part of KPMG which handholds startups also in terms of the conceptualization, go-to-market sell, raising funds. So that particular team works with startup and help them to grow their business and help them find many more business avenues. Yeah, you can connect with me and I'll connect you to that team. It depends upon which city you are registered with. Are you based out of Dubai? Okay, I can help you find some connect with that particular team. Yes, sir. I know. Yeah, my colleague Rohit will give you the mic, please.
So my question is, what is KPMG doing to enhance the confidence of many entrepreneurs who want to start their business in tier 2 or tier 3 cities? Like, not everyone knows how to plan a startup or who to approach. So what is KPMG doing? Are they running any promotions or any programs for these people?
No, sir, in this case, we are working with Government of India. I will say we are the backroom boys. We are helping Government of India in planning this through. One big initiative which Government of India has taken was this element called startup ranking. The left column box, the fourth element, startup ranking. Now, what startup ranking was meant for, that we are going to compare one region versus other. We have close to 30 provinces. Now we are making all of these provinces compete with one other and the best, the second best on different pillars. So we created that entire framework, helped the government of India in thinking. In that, one element was, are you promoting entrepreneurship within your region, within your tier 2, tier 3 cities? Because eventually if government at the provincial level does not charge those ecosystem, does not create those success stories, funding avenues, people will not leave the job or college and come and set up their own farm. So we can help these governments in thinking through that what you really need to do for tier 2, tier 3 or whatever method. As KPMG, we haven't done this because we work on behalf of the government in this case. Kerala has one of the vibrant ecosystem, Kerala Startup Mission, if I'm not wrong. And I know for sure whatever Kerala has done so far, and I can tell you with great confidence over the next 6 months, you will see 10 times bigger effort coming from Kerala. And you are absolutely right. If you as a startup is not funded well, you will not be successful. Hence, government will not be able to make that claim that you're bringing birth to a large enterprise. Fortunately, unfortunately, right now it's concentrated in some of the high-flying 4-5 metros. The new initiative under Startup India is talking about going beyond metros.
I need only $10 per customer, right? Anybody who can invest with me, $10 per customer. Of course, my potential target is 10 million customers.
$10 per customer you invest to acquire.
If an investor is willing, of course, I'll be looking for a 10 million customers in my business aspect. So, of course.
So please do get associated with Startup India. If you know, we have a Startup India Awards. If you are a part of that elite or premium club, which is 30 startups in the country, trust me, you'll have 8 different channels to help you, including business development.
Right, okay. I'm IIM alumni and also have a very brilliant team with us, and including the Harvard professors. And we are focusing on the smart healthcare segment, and we are a 360 health aggregate in India. And it is the first of its kind in India.
Absolutely, you have my coordinates in the folder. Happy to help you in connecting whatever I can do in my capacity, and of course, Startup India.
Sure, thank you, sir. I appreciate your heart.
Thank you. Any other questions if I can help you with? Any suggestion, in fact, this is the first time I'm coming up and bringing this framework. I haven't attempted this. This is coming for the first time. It's the body of knowledge which we've been able to collect over the last 6 years. But happy to learn if you think, we are missing certain elements, something more can be done. If any of your government institutions wants to understand more, happy to help on that part.
Part of a startup, is KPMG providing any support for analyzing the market where the startup is planning to set up their services or product, providing some market analysis and that all support so that they don't fumble or make wrong decisions, because the problem with the startup is that they lack maybe in-depth market analysis.
Can you help which area you're looking at, which domain?
Health.
So we have a very established healthcare practice which comes up with report quite regularly about how market is changing in the healthcare sector, not only in India but globally. You can use those reports to understand that how the landscape, and if you are focusing on India, Indian healthcare ecosystem, what you need is a more national health mission, digital cards. I mean, it's going to be one of the most vibrant startup-led healthcare mission. You have the NHM, right? You have the national health stack. You're in the right space. And trust me, money is not a problem for a good idea. I understand. So I think with this, I can say thank you to everyone for being a patient listener. It is my privilege to have present this concept in front of each of you. If you feel anything further discussion, I'm very much around today. I'm here tomorrow as well. Happy to connect and discuss this further. Thank you so much for the time, and a pleasure.